What's the most jaw-dropping thing your father's told you? My father told me to take his life. I was shocked. My dad was the gentlest, calmest man I knew. It was the middle of July 2019. My 88-year-old dad had begun acting strangely about a month before. He kept repeating the same things over and over again. The most common one was, "I've committed the unforgivable sin." I would ask him what that meant, and he would tell me that he didn't want to talk about it. Then he would repeat something about his dark thoughts. It was as if he was struggling to talk about it, but he would never explain himself. The other strange thing is that he would stop participating in family discussions. He would passively sit there, staring, almost mute and unemotional. He had been a talkative person, but now he seemed remote, and if probed he would mutter non-sequiturs about maybe devils or God speaking directly to him. It was at the beginning of June that he had began to have strange falls. We noticed he had a cut on his head one day. He said he woke up on the bathroom floor. About a week later he had another cut on his head, and he said he fell against his dresser when he was getting out of bed. He told me he would feel safer if I came to live with him, and since my divorce had just happened and I had no home anymore, it seemed like a good fit. I had only been staying with him a week or so when he started muttering to himself all night. Then he'd shout, I said yes, at the top of his lungs. He did that hundreds of times in one night. Twice he also wet himself before he made it to the toilet. After a few nights of this we took him to the hospital. The doctors were not sure what was causing it, but thought it might be seizures. They gave him anti-seizure medication, and soon he was feeling better. I took him home for another week. We then had a follow-up checkup with my dad's family doctor. Dad had answered all the doctor's questions sensibly, just like his old self, although my sister, who was there, and I had shared with the doc some concerning symptoms, such as my dad's incoherent rambling that often worsened in the afternoons, and his extreme tiredness. As we were driving home he told me that I needed to stop the car. He told me that I was going to get into an accident. I told him I appreciated his concerns, but I was absolutely confident that I would not get into an accident. I was going to drive extra cautiously in light of his fears. He became quite agitated that I didn't know what danger I was in. I pulled into a bakery that was there, bought some bread, came back into the car, and he seemed okay again. It was when we arrived home that he finally told me that it was not okay. He was dying and he wanted me to end him. He'd committed a sin against the Holy Spirit, and needed my help to do the deed. Well, my father has always been religious, but he's never been a religious fanatic. He was never the kind of person to believe that God or devils were talking to him directly and exclusively. I could always tell someone was psychotic by the fact that they would ignore sensible, trusted loved ones who might have had a contrary viewpoint. My father's job, you see, back in the 1980s, was in part helping psychotic people transition out of mental institutions and back into normal life. It was at that time he taught me this axiom: neurosis is building castles in the sky. Psychosis is living in them. My dad was living in them. Yes, I had seen my fair share of psychosis. I was now convinced that my dad had gone genuinely psychotic. Since we had recently been visiting his family doctor, I called him about this new psychotic episode, and he told me to take my dad to the hospital right away. That night after I'd left the hospital but my dad stayed, of course, the nurses reported that my dad took off his hospital gown and ran up and down the hallways grabbing random things from carts and nursing stations. The staff had to restrain him. They upped his anti-seizure medications, and he became extremely dopey. It was after a few weeks of this that many people, including the doctors, suggested I give up on my dad. But I never did. My siblings didn't either. We disbelieved the doctors when they told us that this might be the new normal. My dad was probably dying, they said, and we had to get used to it. The nurses told us that he was acting as if he had a bladder or urinary tract infection. The doctor said that was impossible. The blood work was not showing it. It was my theory that my dad had a tooth infection. We had a dentist appointment scheduled in June that had to be cancelled because of his episodes. I kept asking the doctors to investigate his mouth, but there was no dentist on staff in the hospital, no dental x-ray machines. They told us we could take him to a dentist, but he was too loopy to leave. We kept wondering if maybe the seizure medications were making him so dopey. I kept wondering about whether the sudden onset of the symptoms, everyone said dementia doesn't happen all at once like this, could have been caused by some kind of infection, and whether antibiotics might be helpful. Who am I to know? I'm just a son who cares about his dad. I'm no doctor. We siblings all watched my dad for weeks. We prevented him from falling as he went to the washroom. We tried to take him on walks, although that was challenging. We tried to get him outside into the sun, because we knew he needed some vitamin D. None of these things were services that the hospital could provide. We sat with him day and night. In the middle of August, 2 of my dad's implant teeth fell out. By this time he was passing out in his chair 30 minutes after taking his meds every day. The doctors re-evaluated his blood work. They said there were some slight markers of infection, and they would give him some antibiotics finally. They also adjusted his seizure meds. 2 days later, almost like a miracle, he became himself again. After that my siblings and I continued to spend every day with him.